my name is Hyper, and in today's video I'm gonna go over some of the gadgets that I don't see a lot of people using on the battlefield. Now this list might not be for everyone, because I'm sure there'll be people here that say, oh, I use these gadgets constantly and I'm doing really good with them, but I think that generally speaking these are the gadgets that not a lot of people are using. Now at number 1 on the list we've got the EOD-bot. Now the EOD-bot is definitely not the most effective gadget that you can use as the engineer class, but it's definitely a thing that you can have a lot of fun with. The EOD-bot is a little bit hard to control, it sometimes goes all over the place, and that makes it a little bit uncontrollable and sometimes really weird stuff can happen. Now since almost no one is using this, then there might be a couple of things that you don't know about the EOD-bot. For instance, there is a tactical or a flashlight on the EOD-bot. You can turn that on and off by pressing the up key on the pad on the Xbox One controller. And besides repairing and dealing damage to enemy vehicles, you can also use this gadget to plant the MCOMs. Now this can be a really good way to plant the MCOMs. For instance, I'm playing here on Operation Locker, and this last set of MCOMs is really hard to take, so I switch to my EOD-bot and I quickly go and plant that bomb. So this could be a really useful gadget, but most of the times the EOD-bot gets shot immediately, so I wouldn't really advise you to do this, but it could be effective. Now next up on the list is the Mortar. Now the Mortar works a little bit different than the Mortar did in Battlefield 3. In Battlefield 3, if you remember back then you had to sit beside the Mortar and you couldn't really go anywhere else. Now in Battlefield 4 you can place the Mortar somewhere and then remotely control it from another place. Now I like to use the Mortar really aggressively. You can see right here, my tactic is that I put down my Mortar at the beginning of the map and then I'm gonna push up myself. Now I'm using the AWS here and I can recommend this weapon to anyone using the support class. It shreds through people like paper and it's just so effective. But yeah, what I like to do is when I'm just out of the action, I'm gonna go and find a place where the enemy can't see me and I'm gonna access my remotely controlled Mortar. Now what this allows me to do is scan the area, and I'm able to see on that map on the Mortar where all the enemies are, and that is really gonna give me an advantage. And also I'm gonna shoot, of course, because that is what you do with a Mortar, but it really does give me a big advantage that I can see where the enemy is on that Mortar. So the main advantage is now that I can see where the enemies are and I can also get a couple of kills. Now although it can be used quite effectively, I wouldn't advise you all to go and use it, because if there are more than 10 enemy mortars or 10 enemy mortars in the enemy team, then I see that it's gonna be quite frustrating if they're all firing at you at the same time. Now the next thing on the list is the MAV, which is basically a flying motion sensor and is really useful. And I don't see a lot of people using them, although this gadget is much more used than the other two that I just talked about. But still, it is a gadget that doesn't appear quite often on the battlefield. Now even when you're not gonna fly with the MAV, then it's best to just put it down, because it basically acts like a motion sensor, and trust me, seeing the enemy on the minimap is really gonna help you. Now the technique that I like to use when I'm using the MAV is just, before I go into the action, I hop into my MAV, I fly high in the sky and spot all the enemies that are ahead of me. That way I can have a big advantage when all the enemies are spotted, and I have a much easier time taking them out. Now another thing that you can do with the MAV is blowing up enemy equipment. You can blow up equipment such as the C4, spawn beacons, mines, slams and all that sort of stuff. Now I'd say the MAV is a really good tool for a recon to have. Now if you have your own gadget that you rarely use on the battlefield, then feel free to let me know in the comments. Or if you have a weapon that you always like to use, then feel free to also let me know that in the comments. But yeah guys, that was the video for today. If you enjoyed it, then please hit like. If you're new around, feel free to subscribe. This was Hyper, and as always, thanks for watching.